Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. When you think of Nepal, what comes to mind?
Himalayas, probably.
Right. Maybe prayer flags, colorful and blowing in the wind.
Definitely. And like this feeling of ancient culture and tradition.
Exactly. But today, we're going to zoom in on a specific piece of that. We're diving into the world of the Newar people.
The indigenous inhabitants of the Kathmandu Valley.
You got it. And we're using this fantastic book by Dor Bahadur Bista, People of Nepal, to guide us. Specifically, we're looking at Chapter 2, which is all about the Newars.
Their cultural identity, their unique social structure, it's all in there.
So if you're looking for a shortcut to understanding this truly fascinating culture, this deep dive is for you. We're going to break down the key takeaways from Bista's work, give you a clear picture, and maybe even spark a few aha moments along the way.
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's jump in. So first things first, who are the Newars? Where do they fit within the bigger picture of Nepal?
Well, as Bista makes clear, the Newars are the original inhabitants of the Kathmandu Valley.
The OGs, right?
Right. And they're not just a historical footnote. They're still a major presence today in Nepal, especially in the big urban centers.
Like Kathmandu, Patan, and Badgan.
Exactly. But they're also found in smaller towns and villages throughout the region.
And one thing that really struck me as I was reading Bista's account is just how involved they are in Nepal's economy. He talks about them being shopkeepers, businessmen, artisans, farmers.
A real cross-section, yeah.
It seems like they're really woven into the fabric of the nation's economic life.
Absolutely. And that speaks to their long history and their deep connection to this land. You know, one thing that's important to understand is that the term Newar itself, while it's convenient, it's kind of a recent invention.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Bista points out that it's basically a unifying label for a group of people who are actually quite diverse. They live primarily in the Nepal Valley, which, by the way, is just another name for the Kathmandu Valley.
So it's like an umbrella term then. Kind of like saying European, which encompasses so many different cultures and identities.
That's a great analogy. And this is a key point to keep in mind. Unlike some other ethnic groups in Nepal, like, say, the Gurungs, the Magars, or the Tamangs, who are often seen as single, homogeneous units, the Newars are much more internally diverse. They're not a monolithic block.
Fascinating. So even within the Newar community, there's a lot of variation and subgroups.
Exactly. Now, the origins of the name Newar itself are pretty interesting. Bista suggests a possible link to the word Nepal, almost like a chicken or the egg situation. Did the people get their name from the place, or the place from the people?
And there's that older term, Nava, which might mean lowered or valley. It adds another layer to the connection.
Right. It really speaks to their long-standing relationship with the valley itself. Now, when we go beyond the name and try to trace their actual origins, things get a little murkier.
More theories, less certainty.
Exactly. There's this theory that they migrated from regions north of the Himalayas, maybe centuries ago.
And then there's that intriguing possibility of a connection to a Hindu community on the Malabar coast, the Nair or Nayar people.
Yeah, that one's based on some phonetic similarities between the names, which is always fun to think about.
It is. But as Bista points out, there's not enough concrete evidence to say for sure.
Right. It's a possibility, but not a certainty. Bista also presents an alternative view, which is that the Newars have been in the Nepal Valley for a very, very long time, possibly even predating the historical records we have.
So it's possible they've been there all along, gradually absorbing influences from different groups over time.
Exactly. And Bista highlights the impact of Tibetan and Indian cultures, among others, on the development of Newar society. It's a real melting pot.
And then the arrival of the Malla kings in the 13th century seems to have been a major turning point.
Oh, absolutely. They brought with them a very strong Hindu influence, which had a huge impact on the Newars, particularly in terms of the development of a caste system.
So the Malla period really solidified that Hindu presence, which of course continues to this day.
Right. And the Shah kings who came later also contributed to the evolution of Newar society. So you have this group, the Newars, with potentially very deep roots in the Kathmandu Valley, and they've been shaped by all these different cultural influences.
Okay, so we've talked about their history and their cultural influences. What about their physical appearance, their language? How many of them are there?
Well, according to Bista, the Newars are described as having a mix of what he calls Mongoloid and Mediterranean features, which, makes sense given their diverse origins and their history of interaction with different groups.
Yeah, it's like the Kathmandu Valley is this crossroads where different cultures and peoples have met and mingled for centuries.
Precisely. Now, language-wise, they have their own unique language, Newari.
So not just a dialect of Nepali.
No, it's a completely separate language belonging to the Tibeto-Burman family. It's got its own script too, Devanagari. And what's interesting is that Bista mentions there are actually half a dozen or so dialects within Newari itself.
So even within the newer language, there's regional variation.
That's right. Now, in terms of population, Bista estimates there are around 400,000 Newars in total.
That's a sizable group.
It is. And most of them, about 55%, live in the Kathmandu Valley, especially in those big cities we talked about earlier. But they have also migrated to other parts of Nepal and even further afield, often establishing themselves in specific trades or professions.
So while the Kathmandu Valley is their heartland, they've definitely made their mark elsewhere as well.
No doubt about it. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of newer culture, and one that Bista really dives into, is their unique approach to social organization and religion. This is where things get really interesting.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So, what makes the Newars so unique is that they adhere to both Hinduism and Buddhism simultaneously. It's not an either-or situation for them.
So they're not just Hindu or Buddhist, they're both.
Exactly. A newer individual will typically identify with a specific caste within the Hindu system and also belong to a particular subgroup within the newer Buddhist framework.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it? These two parallel social structures coexisting within the same community.
It really is, and it shapes so much of their social life and customs. So let's break down some of these major subgroups that Bista talks about. On the Buddhist side, you have the Guvaju, which includes the Vajracharya and Sakyavansha, who are traditionally the priests. Then there's the Bear, also known as Gudas. And then the Shrestha, which has further divisions like the Urhai, Halawai, and Jopu, among others.
And on the Hindu side of things,
Bista lists the major Hindu subgroups as the Deo Brahmin, the Jha, a separate Hindu Shrestha group, and the Jogi. Interestingly, he notes that the Hindu Jogi are considered to be on par with the Buddhist Nai in terms of social standing.
so there's this interesting parallel between these two seemingly separate systems.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to note that while Bista presents these groups in a hierarchical order, the actual practice of ritual status can be more complex.
Meaning there's not always a rigid ladder of social standing.
Right. Some groups might consider themselves to be relatively equal in terms of ritual importance, even if they're listed differently. It's not always a clear-cut hierarchy.
Got it. So we've got these intricate social structures based on both Hindu and Buddhist frameworks. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the Newars also have a fascinating system of traditional occupations and skills.
Absolutely. And these occupations are deeply intertwined with their social and religious identities. Bista provides a really detailed list, which really highlights this connection for you.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's like a snapshot of a society where your profession was often determined by your social and religious group.
Exactly. So, for example, the Gavaju, as we mentioned, traditionally served as Buddhist priests. The Bears were known for their skills in metalwork, goldsmiths, silversmiths, coppersmiths. They were also skilled painters, sculptors, and carpenters.
It's like a whole guild of artisans.
Exactly. Then you have the Shrestha, particularly the Urhei subgroup, who were traditionally involved in business and trade. They were the shopkeepers and merchants. Interestingly, Bista notes that Shresttas in rural areas were also involved in farming, showing a bit of flexibility within the system. And then you have the Halawai, who were known for their confectionery shops. And the Jayapas, who make up a large part of the newer population, were primarily farmers, working the land, often using yoked buffalo.
It's amazing the level of detail Bista provides, and he goes on and on. You have the Kumhali, the potters, the cow, the blacksmiths, the chipa, the color dyers, the Sami, the oil pressers, the Mali, the gardeners and florists, who played an important role in temple rituals.
And the list goes on. The Nao, who were barbers and nail cutters, also participated in masked dances. The Due were often poor agricultural laborers who also performed in religious dances wearing masks. Then you have the Bao, who were sweepers and keepers of tantric deities, the Poor, the butchers, the Chome, the scavengers, and the Kulu, the drum makers.
Wow. It's like every profession had its place within this intricate social fabric.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have the Hindu groups. The Deo Brahmins and Jaha were the Hindu priests and scholars. The Hindu Shrestha held a similar social standing to their Buddhist counterparts, often involved in trade in the Kathmandu Valley and farming elsewhere. And the Jogi, who often played music during special occasions. They were considered low caste in the Hindu hierarchy, but interestingly, most of them were actually Buddhist in practice.
It's a really complex picture, but fascinating nonetheless.
It is. It really highlights for you how interwoven these occupations were with the social and religious life of the Newars. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another crucial aspect of Newer society: marriage. Vista really emphasizes the importance of marriage within the Newer community, both socially and religiously.
And arranged marriages seem to be the norm, right?
Yes, that's correct. Marriages are often arranged, with horoscopes being consulted and negotiations taking place between the families. It's a very significant event, not just for the couple, but for the entire extended family.
Makes sense. Now, Bista describes a really unique custom among Buddhist Newars, the Bel Bibaha.
Ah, yes, the symbolic marriage of young girls to a wood apple fruit.
It sounds strange, but I'm guessing there's a deeper meaning behind it.
There is. It's basically a way of providing a form of permanent marital security for the girl. Even if her earthly marriage were to end, she would still be symbolically married to the wood apple. It's almost like a safeguard, ensuring her social standing within the community.
That's a really interesting concept. So it's a symbolic marriage that transcends the physical realm.
Precisely. Now, Hindu Newar marriages, on the other hand, are generally considered to be more permanent and less easily dissolved, similar to the practices you see among Brahmins and Kshatras.
So a bit more like the traditional concept of marriage in other parts of Nepal.
Exactly. And Bista describes the wedding ceremonies themselves as being quite elaborate, often lasting several days. There are lots of rituals, feasts, processions between the bride's and groom's houses.
It sounds like a real community celebration.
Oh, absolutely. Bista mentions the custom of the groom's procession arriving at the bride's house at night, and then the bride being taken to the groom's house the following morning. And then, of course, there are feasts and celebrations at both houses in the days that follow.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Now, one of the things that really stands out about the Newars is their unique religious syncretism. Bista really emphasizes this blending of Hindu and Buddhist practices in their daily lives.
It's truly remarkable. It's not uncommon for newer families and individuals to venerate deities from both traditions and to visit temples of both faiths.
So it's not a case of choosing one over the other.
No, it's much more fluid than that. You might see a Hindu worshiper at a Buddhist shrine or vice versa. It's a very tolerant and inclusive approach to religion.
Bista gives the example of Swayambhu Chaitya, which is a major Buddhist site, but it also has a shrine to Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of learning, and both Hindus and Buddhists visit the site.
Exactly. It's a great example of this harmonious coexistence. And this syncretism isn't just at the individual level, it extends to the community as a whole. The Newars celebrate festivals from both traditions.
So it's really integrated into their cultural fabric.
Absolutely. Bista mentions festivals like Indra Jatra, Gai Jatra, and the Rath Jatra of Maxyendranath as examples of events that draw participation from the entire Newer community, regardless of their religious affiliation.
It speaks to a deep level of cultural understanding and respect, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, beyond caste and religion, Bista also introduces the concept of guthis, which are these fascinating social organizations that play a vital role in newer society.
Okay, I'm not familiar with Guthis. Tell me more.
So guthis are basically traditional newer social organizations. They're usually based on kinship ties or shared locality, and they serve a variety of functions: religious, social, economic.
So it's like a community support system.
In a way, yes. They handle things like funerals, the upkeep of temples, organizing feasts and social gatherings.
It sounds like a really important part of their social structure.
It is. They provide a framework for collective action and support within the community. Bista describes three main types of guthis: religious guthis, which focus on worship and temple maintenance; functional guthis, which are centered around specific tasks or professions; and social or entertainment guthis, which are more about community bonding and recreation.
So there's a Guthi for pretty much everything.
Pretty much, yeah. And within a guthi, there's often a hierarchical structure with an elder, known as a thakali, serving as a leader. Membership in a guthi is often determined by lineage, meaning it's passed down through families. But social guthis can be more voluntary, based on shared locality or interests.
So it's like a mix of tradition and personal choice.
Right. Now, lastly, let's touch upon the newer customs surrounding death, as Bista describes them.
Okay, what are their death rituals like?
Well, Bista notes that for most Newars, with the exception of the Jogi and Taylor castes, cremation by the riverside is the standard practice. And as you might expect, the guthi plays a major role in organizing the funeral rites.
Makes sense.
Bisa mentions some specific traditions, like covering the deceased with a yellow or red satin shroud, which is then removed just before cremation by a member of the Guthi. There's also a customary mourning period, which lasts for 12 days for close relatives and a full year for the son, with specific rules and observances, similar to what you see among Brahmins and Kshatras.
So, from birth to marriage to death, the newer community is guided by this rich and intricate set of traditions and social structures.
That's right, and that's really what Bista's work highlights for us in this chapter. The Newars are a truly unique and fascinating people, with a rich cultural heritage that has evolved over centuries, blending influences from different sources, yet maintaining its own distinct identity.
It's a testament to their adaptability and resilience as a culture. They've managed to preserve their traditions while also embracing change.
Absolutely. And their unique approach to religion, with its harmonious coexistence of Hinduism and Buddhism, is something we can all learn from.
I agree. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought. What can the Newar model, a social organization and religious coexistence, teach us about navigating diversity in our own world? It's something to ponder. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about the Newars and Nepali culture, I highly recommend checking out Dor Bahadur Bista's work. Thanks for joining us.